Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, it's been a quiet week. It's been peaceful, it's been grey, the autumn has arrived. I've actually been a bit sick this week. I've been off work and I went for a corona test. It's not corona, it's just a little flu. But that meant that I had some time to play some games. I actually reached out on Twitter asking my followers for some recommendations of games that you can play when you're not feeling like you can concentrate very much. Some relaxing, easy games to play if you're feeling a bit under the weather. And I got some really good suggestions actually. I played a bunch of different stuff, all of which I will talk about today on this episode, including the best one, which will be the featured game, and that is a kind of a post-apocalyptic gardening simulation called Cloud Gardens. I also played a couple of bigger games. Last week I was playing some Psychonauts 2. If you are on Game Pass or have been following the games media at all, you might have noticed that this game has been picking up some very, very good reviews. And I have to say, they are very well deserved. I've been loving Psychonauts 2. I am a fan of 3D platformers and always have been. I remember playing Spyro way back on PlayStation 1 and Mario 64 and all those kind of games. I've always been a fan of 3D platformers, and Psychonauts 2 must be one of the best ones that I've played in the genre, actually. I also played Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt that it was perhaps a little generic in some ways, that the kind of the art style and the presentation story of it were something that I'd seen before. It didn't bring a huge amount of new ideas to the table. But Psychonauts 2 really does, actually. It has a wonderful art style that looks a little like claymation, perhaps, or like stop motion. And that's something that I've really enjoyed about it. It's a pleasure to look at. It's a pleasure to play too. You run around, you have a double jump and a dash and a fast move where you kind of walk on a ball so you can move around quickly. You can use your psychic abilities to lift things up, a little bit like Control. You can lift up and throw most objects. And you have all different kind of maneuvers and skills that you can use. Through to clairvoyance, where you can enter the minds of other people, and that's where the main thrust of Psychonauts 2 lies. You go into other people's minds as a psychonaut, and you explore the problems they're having, the different psychological issues that they are facing, from panic to insecurity to just kind of tangled emotional baggage. And you try and untangle all of that stuff, but these worlds that you go into inside of other people's minds are really, really imaginative, really creative, really cartoonish. It varies from the first one that you go into is the mind of a dentist who has been a bit messed up by some experiences that he has had. And so this mind world is covered in teeth that are protruding from the walls and the floor, and strange imagery. It's kind of surreal, and really, really interesting. And everyone's mind that you go into has a different scenario going on. So there is like a hub world, which is the Psychonauts HQ, but the game is punctuated by these really imaginative, vivid environments where you're inside someone's internal dream world of their mind. And I've been really enjoying that one. It's a kind of a spectacular game, actually. A lot of fun, really well put together, and I'll definitely be talking about it in more detail later. I also dipped into the demo of Death Trash, which you might have heard about. It's been tearing it up on Twitter and getting a lot of attention. A game that's been in development for 5 years with a solo developer. It's a pixel art, top-down RPG, a little reminiscent of those early Fallout games before it became a 3D game. And I think I have to say, actually, I've never had to jump through as many hoops to play a game as I did with Death Trash. Because I'm playing on a Mac, I think I had a lot of struggles trying to get a controller to work with it or trying to get a mouse and keys set up that felt comfortable. So I've tried it on a partitioned Windows drive. I've tried it on Mac via Steam. I've tried it with an Xbox and Bluetooth controller, and nothing was quite working, but I tried it one more time today and realised that it was perhaps the Bluetooth connection that was throwing off the game, or throwing off Steam actually. Steam is just never really worked as easily as I wish it would with controllers, but it turned out that a wired DualShock controller worked just fine. And so I spent a couple of hours with Death Trash. You start off in an underground bunker where robots look after people, but for some reason you're being thrown out and you're not quite sure why. It's just medical reasons. And so you go through a brief tutorial where the robots try and teach you how to survive in the outside world, and then you're cast out into the outside world, which is a post-apocalyptic wasteland with a few settlements and mutants and humans. But there's something very strange about this world. It's very dour, it's very bleak and very broken down. There is trash everywhere, but the strange thing about it is that there is a lot of flesh everywhere. There are huge kind of swathes of maroon flesh and meat that is just growing out of the land. So as you move around this landscape, this meatscape, there is this kind of pulsating, pixelated, meaty flesh everywhere. You can pick it up and eat it raw to heal. So it's a very bleak and disgusting meatscape that you wander through, and you have to fight off hostiles. You get missions. It's an RPG. You get different items that you can learn how to craft. You get trash, which you can turn into bullets or machinery. You get chips in your mind that give you extra abilities. You get different weapons and abilities such as stealth, which makes you invisible. You can walk past enemies if you use your stealth. You get an electricity attack that can stun people. You get rifles, pistols, and a cudgel that you can use to batter stuff with melee attacks. And there's something very, very intriguing about Death Trash. It feels like it's got it going on somehow. You know, when you play a game and you straight away recognize that this is going to be a good one. I'm kind of fighting my urge to keep playing, actually, because it's in early access, there's lots of stuff missing, but it's so intriguing that I'm just very tempted to keep playing it, even though it's not finished. And the game does warn you that your save file won't carry over when the full game comes out, because it's all subject to change at this early point. But I'm feeling the pull of playing more Death Trash, so I might well do so. Ideally, I'd love to play it on, I think, maybe the Switch. It seems like a game that would be really nice on the Switch with its pixel art. And of course, console versions come with the added bonus of being optimized for controllers, so everything will be really nice and easy. But neither of those two games were the ones that were recommended to me for my convalescent sicky period. The games that I got recommended were both on Switch. One of them is called Townscaper, and one of them is called Islanders. And both are kind of city building games where you put buildings together to create something bigger. But they are very different games. Townscaper is a very pretty game where you're looking down a rippling ocean, and if you tap on the screen, it's a touchscreen game. I used at least the touchscreen controls, which worked very nicely. And if you tap on the sea, like some paving will appear out of the ocean. If you tap again, then it will turn into a little house just sticking out of the sea. If you tap again and again and again, it will add stories to the top of the building, and you end up with a kind of a conical tower with a spired roof. And if you keep tapping and tapping and tapping in different directions, there is a kind of procedurally generated building that starts to appear, and that adds features seemingly at random, like trees and vegetation and hedgerows and pathways. And the more that you add, the more you tap on the screen, it just develops into a really large, interesting series of buildings and pathways at different heights. It's very vertical. But there is no real game mode to this. It's kind of an endless creative mode game. And as such, it held my attention for maybe 1 or 2 hours. I built 2 different towns, just trying out different things. One of them was like a spired city that reminded me of Saint-Malo in France, just with these spired rooftops on a hill. And the other one that I made, I tried to make some big building blocks just to see what would happen. But there is no game mode, there is no challenge mode, there is no aim, other than making something pretty and cool. And while that is very fun, and I did have fun with this game, and it is only, I think, $5 on the Switch eShop, it meant that my attention wandered. I felt that I'd seen what it had to offer very quickly. And I did wish that the game had some more challenge to it, or some more structure around the cool central mechanic. It was like they'd made the central mechanic and then stopped making, when actually this game could have done with some more guidance to kind of keep you invested and to give you something to aim for. And then that's where Islanders does things differently. It feels not as natural and good to play as Townscaper. Townscaper is very intuitive and very easy to use, especially because of the touchscreen controls. Islanders is very different. You use the Joy-Cons for Islanders, and it does have a game mode. So what you do in Islanders is you select what kind of building you would like to make on your island. You start with a blank island, which has a few characteristics. Maybe it has rocks, maybe it has grassland or mountains. And you can choose whether you'd like a city pack or a seaweed farm pack or a farm pack or a farmer or a shaman, all of these different things. And each little set that you get comes with maybe 5 to 10 structures that you can create. And as you hover over the map, wondering where you're going to place your little buildings, you can see the score that you'll get for putting it there. For example, if you're building a lumberjack, if you put the wood workshop near trees, you'll get more points. And there is a little points aim. You have to get to, say, 100 points with your buildings, and you have to arrange them on the screen in a way that will get the most points from each building, take you over that little finish line, and then you'll get offered another choice of building packs. So say you start with a lumberjack and you build a wood workshop and a sawmill, and then you get next a city pack where you can pick houses or like a cathedral, and you have to arrange them, you have to figure out the best places for them, and get the points. So it's very gamified. It's much more gamified than the endless creative mode of Townscaper. But I found that Islanders was a little clunky to play somehow. I think that the fact that they'd made the rotation of the screen, which you have to use quite often to rotate the land and to see where the good places to build are, is mapped to the shoulder buttons rather than the right stick, which felt very counterintuitive to me. It felt kind of clunky every time you try and rotate the island, which you're doing on a moment-to-moment basis. It feels awkward, and that's a big problem for the central control scheme of a game. So while Islanders does have the challenge that you need to keep you invested, even if it is a very light challenge and you can't really build a sprawling city, and your lumberjack yard doesn't produce wood that you then have to stockpile and choose how to use, it's just cosmetic, really. And so you're really just chasing the score, and you're doing it with quite a clunky kind of central mechanic. So I fell off Islanders pretty quickly. But I have to say, I do appreciate those recommendations. I did enjoy playing both of them. They were both games that I could play without having to concentrate particularly hard. And so it is what I asked for on Twitter. And they're both really fun little city builder games. They are each cost $5, and so it's not a big investment, and they'll certainly kill an hour or two. And maybe that's all you need from a game like that. The last game that I wanted to talk about before I talk about Cloud Gardens is a new game that's on Xbox and PC called Lake. And this one I found, someone tweeted about it, and I just became very curious about it. It's a game where you play a computer programmer in the 80s who has to take some time out of her busy career and goes back to her hometown in the rural US to cover her father's shifts as the local postman. Your parents have gone away on a holiday to Florida, and so you come back to your hometown. You meet the local postman, you're given a van, you're given a route that you have to do. It's a third-person game with a little bit of walking, but for most of the time you're driving. And the only aim in this game is to deliver letters and deliver parcels. It looks a little bit like, I would say the art style is similar to Firewatch. It's a very beautiful depiction of nature with all of these autumn colours, beautiful trees, mountains in the distance, and the lake around which the town is based. And you do laps of the lake from day to day. You pick up the parcels at the post office, you drive around looking for addresses, you have a map that you can easily flip in and out of. You deliver parcels and meet the people that you're delivering them to, including a cranky old cat lady, including your childhood best friend, including a fun video game clerk who gives you a copy of The Postman Always Rings Twice to watch at home. And so you have these interactions and little bits of dialogue where you can choose the tone of your responses. And you have these very kind of everyday, very normal conversations, and then get back into your van, drive around some more. Maybe someone will ask you to do a little chore as a favour. And it's very, very peaceful. I've played only a couple of hours of it. It's almost confrontationally mundane, I would say. But that's something that I've actually really been appreciating. You know, compared to Psychonauts 2, which is like this kind of vibrant assault on the senses, and games like Death Trash, which is very traditional sci-fi, very violent, very futuristic, kind of high sci-fi, brutal, very video gamey kind of game. Lake actually feels very different in tone to almost anything that I've ever played. I'm still yet to play Gone Home, which is something that I really need to fix. It's a classic. People talk about it all the time. It's a huge reference point for gaming, and I'm yet to play it, but I've got a feeling that the Gone Home Dear Esther crowd, Dear Esther rather, will really like Lake. And I'm really curious to see where it goes. I'm curious to see if they introduce any more traditionally dramatic story elements or any tension or anything like that, you know, because at the moment it's just very, very quotidian everyday activities, just driving around this lake and talking to people, not saying anything big, not doing anything big, but for some reason it feels almost like a holiday to play this game. It feels like you're being taken out of everyday life to this beautiful rural environment and just doing these really basic activities, and I'm really into it. I think I will come back and maybe do a full episode about Lake later if it keeps my interest, and I am curious to see if it will. I have to say it also feels like a bit of a break from video games, strangely considering that it is one, in that, as I said, most video games involve shooting, drama, you know, compared to things like 12 Minutes or compared to the other games that I've been playing. This one really feels like a breath of fresh air. And I think for a lot of people it might be a little dull, but the dullness of it is interesting to me somehow. Yeah, it's a really fascinating game. And before I move on to talk about Cloud Gardens, I will briefly mention that this show is Patreon supported. So if you're enjoying this episode, if you're a first-time listener, or if you're a regular listener, I really appreciate all of you. And I would like to say that I do have a Patreon. It's at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. And for as little as $1 a month, you can support the show and support me. I use that money to do things like buying the domain name that I recently bought for gaminginthewild.com. I also use it to source games, to buy music that I use on the show, and to upgrade my equipment every now and then. For that membership fee, it's as little as $1 a month. You'll get occasional extra episodes for patrons only. You'll get an invitation to our fun Discord community where you can talk to other listeners and other gamers about what you're playing. And I also do sale recommendations so that you can get games cheap, and especially games that I've covered on the show. So if you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, I really appreciate that. And you can find that link at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I will put a link in the show notes. Also, if you're listening on Apple, I would really appreciate you dropping a rating on the show and maybe even writing a few nice words. And with that out of the way, let's move on and talk about the featured game of the episode, Cloud Gardens. So Cloud Gardens is a game that came out this month. I think it came out at the very beginning of September. It's been available in early access for quite a while, and it's gone through some transformations during that time. It's by Thomas van den Berg. It's out now on Xbox, Windows and Mac OS, which is where I played it. I played it on Steam, and I'm glad that I played it there actually, because although I have tried out the controller control scheme, and it's quite good, I think it's a game that is best played on mouse, this one. The soundtrack is absolutely wonderful. It's by Amos Roddy, who did In Other Waters, and I think the soundtrack adds a huge amount to this game in terms of the the atmosphere. It's just quite beautiful ambient soundtrack that really smooths things along. The developer describes it as a chill game that hovers somewhere between sandbox toy and a game with challenges. Use plants to overgrow abandoned wasteland dioramas and harness the power of nature to overgrow lo-fi scenes of urban decay and manufactured landscapes. And that's a pretty good description. It's really solid, actually. I describe it as a verdant creative mode sandbox with light puzzle aspects in which you rewild and overgrow melancholic post-industrial scenes. And this game doesn't have a Metacritic score yet. It's only had a couple of reviews, but what reviews it has had have been very good. Enemy, Hey Poor Player, and Xbox Addicts all gave it around an 8 out of 10. Jewel Shockers have called it utterly charming, and the indie game website called it an aesthetic meditation and a very good deconstructed version of Katamari. And they gave a 9 out of 10, but they were reviewing the early access version. And as for how long the game is, it doesn't have enough ratings on how long to beat yet, but I will say that I have played now 7 hours, and I just got a trophy saying that I'm halfway there, in inverted commas. So it looks like it's probably, it's going to be around 15 hours worth of gameplay, I think, but that maybe depends on how you play this game. I've been playing it quite slowly and not rushing it at all, so that's a very broad estimate that it would be that long. So what is Cloud Gardens? It's a sandbox puzzle game, but puzzle comes in inverted commas. It's got very light puzzle elements. And what happens in this game is that at the start of each level, you see a square of land just floating in a kind of a foggy, smoggy, hazy kind of backdrop, just floating there in the air. It starts from a roughly isometric perspective and has kind of voxely, pixely kind of graphics, but it's not isometric strictly because you can rotate the perspective any way you want. You can rotate the viewpoint and look at your little square of land from all sides. And each square of land comes with a couple of seeds that are there, hanging or sticking out of the ground. You can pick the seeds to get started. You start off with just one type of plant, but I think I'm at 10 types of plant now, at about the halfway mark, so you get new types of plant as you move through the game that respond to different conditions. You find somewhere that looks like a good opportune place to put your seed. You stick it in the ground, drag and drop with the mouse, or if you're using the controller, and then you get a kind of a pool of items, of trash basically, of things like traffic cones and shoes and dust bins and all kinds of rubbish. And you have to drop those things into the landscape. You drag and drop them. And every time you drop an object into the landscape, you see a radius drawn around it. And if your seed is in that radius, then the plant will grow. So what you're doing is you're picking your seeds, putting them in the ground, dropping a load of trash into this empty diorama, which makes the plants grow and start to overgrow the environment. And after you've dropped a bunch of stuff around the plants, like 3 or 4 times, they grow in phases until they're big, and they will then flower. You can use a little vacuum to hoover up all of the flowers. That gives you points, and then you can use your points to get more seeds. Put in more seeds in proximity to each other again, drop more objects in, and as you're dropping in, you're overgrowing this landscape. Say it's a train platform with a couple of pylons, some benches, and some stairs and track. You can plant certain types of plant in the soil between the tracks. You can plant some moss on the concrete. You can plant like a climbing wisteria on the wires. And then as you're dropping things into the landscape, you want to position those seeds so that the radius of your objects is reaching as many seeds as possible. There's a little percentage meter at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and you are trying to cover as much of the diorama as possible. When you get up to 100%, you can go on to the next scene. And there is a progression to these scenes. You might start off in the junkyards. There is an overworld map with a dot for each diorama, and you click on the dots and move through these different sequences from junkyards to railroads to rooftops. So you go through, 10 or 12 levels of each type. And as you move through them, you get different kinds of plants, you get different kinds of objects that are relevant to the scenes. For example, on rooftops, you might get things like ventilators, or not ventilators, like aircon units. There's a lot of kind of brutalism in this game. In the rooftop section that I just finished now, there are these kind of brutalist tower blocks, that rooftops that look a little bit like the Barbican, these kind of concrete tower blocks, and you get aircon units that you can stick onto the outsides of them, and pipes and TV aerials and satellite dishes. So the things that you get to use are relevant to the scenario that you're in. For example, in the junkyard you might get rusted cars and things like that. In the railroads you might get signal boxes. In the gardens you might get patio furniture and things like that. And that gives the game like a feeling of reconstructing, of like model making, like making miniature models, but with this very active ingredient of the plants growing over everything in response to what you're doing. And it's a very satisfying central mechanic, and it makes for a very meditative activity playing this game, as you're dropping these things into the scenes and planting your seeds in different places and watching the plants spread over the landscape. It's a very, very calming. I found it to be a very calming game to play, and really enjoyable. And I think that that's something to do with the colour palette. Like the backgrounds are all this kind of dusky, smoggy kind of yellows and pinks, and there's lots of fog. So it's very atmospheric to look at. Then there's the beautiful soundtrack by Amos Roddy, that beautiful ambient music that we've been listening to. It's really just like a lovely sound bath, honestly. It's just gorgeous music. And then there is the kind of, I think that there's a certain appeal just to humans of growing things, of seeing things grow. People love to see things grow. It's good for you to be around growing plants and to have that in your life. It's been proven to be so. And so I think that the activity of doing that in a game, of watching greenery spread over a landscape and feeling like you're spurring that growth on, is relaxing for the mind. And so the whole game is a very calming, lovely experience to play. But that's offset a little bit by this kind of post-industrial melancholy that is hanging over what you're doing. Because what you're doing really is filling the world with rubbish and watching nature overgrow this kind of post-industrial, post-societal landscape, slowly, diorama by diorama. And something that occurred to me just now when I was playing the game, I decided to play it for a few more hours before recording today, just to see if it went anywhere. And it did, actually. It was good to do some more hours playing the game. But something that occurred to me just now was that part of the melancholy of post-industrial games, or post-societal, even post-apocalyptic games, is the remains of humanity that we see in these games. When I think about something like The Last of Us, or The Last of Us Part 2 particularly, as you're moving through the world, and particularly I think one scene where you're scaling your way through a kind of a devastated tower block, and as you come into different people's apartments, you see the leftovers of their lives. For example, like a pair of slippers, or like a duvet cover with a cartoon on it, might be enough to give you this strange feeling that you're in someone's house, but they are gone. And there's a kind of a sadness that comes with post-apocalyptic scenarios. And this game has like quite a heavy dose of that. So despite all of the calm that comes with the activity of playing the game, there is a kind of a deep melancholy that belongs to this game also. Especially when you come to things like rail yards, where you're maybe doing like a tube platform or something like that. And some of the objects that you get might be like a school bag, or a pair of Converse. A lot of the time it's things like dustbins or telegraph poles or this kind of brutalist, kind of almost invisible stuff that you look at every day and you don't even notice, just like aircon units on the outside of tower blocks. We see them every day, depending on where you live, of course, but we don't really notice them. But these particular personal objects, like if you're decorating a junkyard, just strewing trash throughout a junkyard, it doesn't feel bad or personal. But then if you suddenly put down a barbecue, a chair, and a couple of empty beer bottles, suddenly there's an absence of a person in that scene, and it starts to feel sad. So there is a certain sadness that comes with the calm of Cloud Gardens. But there is also a lot of wonder and little flashes of humour in the game too. For example, there's one scene that I remember where you're just, it's like an empty yard and you're just overgrowing it, you're putting down some lampposts and things like that. After a while, if you've grown all the way up a lamppost, the bulb might flicker on and cast light over this yard, and it's really wonderful when that happens. It's like unexpected. And then the last object that you get might be a bathtub, which you just drop into the middle, like a rusted old bathtub. And then the very final things that you get might be a handful of candles and a rubber duck. So you have this very surreal moment where you're setting up a bath the way that you might set up a bath for, like for yourself or for a child or something like that. And then suddenly you're setting one up in this kind of abandoned yard, complete with the duck, complete with the candles, complete with the atmosphere. But the atmosphere is actually not candlelight, it's street light. And so it has a certain surrealism to it that's really nice. And there are these moments of wonder as well, in which you might be decorating, like, say, the top of a house or a house roof. But then as you're finishing the house roof, you click to go to the next level, and rather than whisking you off to the next diorama, the diorama unfolds into a second phase. It might zoom out, and you realise that you're looking down at an entire house plus the garden, and you thought you were done because you'd just done the roof, but actually there's more to the scene than you think. And this kind of scaling up is interesting. I haven't gotten to the end of the game yet, but the scale of things is growing from like planting a single plant in a pot or on a piece of scorched earth up to doing kind of big dioramas with scenes like an overpass or a train track yard, or and dropping larger and larger types of objects into the scene and having plants that spread faster. So I'm very curious to see where this game ends up. I'm really looking forward to seeing how big they go with it and what kind of scale they get to by the end of the game. And something else that occurred to me whilst I was playing this game actually was that obviously it's got something to do with environmentalism, it's got something to do with ecology, it's got something to do with consumerism. Like, all of these ideas are present in the game despite there not being a plot and not being any characters, not being any words. Like, the activity of filling the world with trash is very, very loaded in the kind of environmentalist moment that we find ourselves in. But there is something odd about that too, because as you're filling this world with these non-biodegradable kind of human waste, it's spurring plants to grow, and it's kind of speeding nature along, which is obviously the opposite of what we know to be true. Like, the more kind of lead and chemicals and rusted stuff and non-biodegradable plastic that we put into the world, nature isn't doing well because of it. We're losing plants and we're losing species and things like that. So it made me question the philosophical basis of the game. Like, it feels a little off sometimes to be filling the world with trash but seeing nature flourish as a result of your actions. And so I've thought about that for a while, and I've been rolling it around in my mind. And I've come to the conclusion that perhaps it's more of a symbolic thing. So the only way that I can make it make sense in my head is that by adding trash to landscapes, we are kind of manifesting the reality, which is the end point of each diorama. which is an overgrown post-societal vision of reclaimed urban decay that's been taken over by nature. And so perhaps it works if you look at the game from that point of view, that on that kind of philosophical basis, that by adding trash you're summoning up this vision. And so in that way it could be seen as a cautionary tale. And this isn't to say that the game is without faults. It is very good, and I have had a great time with it. I think it's quite a notable game and quite an accomplished game, and I'm very glad to have played it, actually. I will give a quick shout out to Louis from Time Played 3HR. I don't know if I mentioned that already in the show, but I first found this game when Louis was playing it on stream. He was playing Tomb Raider 2 and got sick of it and started to flick through some indies, and this was one of the indies that he played. And I was quite taken with the look of it and the feel of it, and looked it up, got in touch with the developer and got a code to review it, so thank you very much to the developer. But it isn't a perfect game. I will say that a couple of small pieces of feedback that I would give would be that sometimes when I had to restart a level, because I'd run out of seeds and I'd run out of trash to drop into the landscape, I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong sometimes. I think sometimes the mechanics aren't very clear. Some stuff is left up to your intuition. It isn't particularly tutorialized. It's never made exactly clear what you should be doing. You just have to kind of figure it out for yourself. And that can mean that sometimes on a couple of levels I had to redo 3 or 4 times to progress. Most levels I sailed through first time, but occasionally there was one that just seemed to not come together somehow, and I had to redo it and rethink what I was doing and kind of try different strategies in order to pass through the level. And that might sound pretty normal, that you have to redo some levels sometimes, but it's better if you know why you're failing. And there were some times in this game when it didn't feel clear to me why I was failing. I would also say that the second criticism that I have is somewhat related to that. It's that some of the stages are multi-part. So sometimes you get these multi-part levels where you will start with, like the example I gave earlier, a house roof that turns out to be a house. And if you find the house roof to be very, very easy, and then the rest of the house to be quite difficult, you're always taken back to the start of the level. There was one in particular where I was doing a piece of railway track that was very easy, and then a large piece of land that I was finding very difficult, and I had to redo it 4 or 5 times, and I wished that I would been able to retry from the second stage, because it took me like 5 minutes to get there. It's kind of the equivalent in this game of having a long walk back to a boss battle, for example, in a more traditional game, to have to do the easy stage before you can get onto the hard part. But those are the only 2 critiques that I have of it. I guess one final one is that sometimes the cursor doesn't feel intensely responsive somehow. It feels like it's perhaps like missing a step. So I have found the controls to be just a little unresponsive. It's not quite snappy in the same way as you're using a mouse cursor on your computer desktop. It feels just a little more stodgy than that somehow. But I did try out the controller with it as well as the mouse, and I think I was quite pleasantly surprised, actually. You do use keys if you're using the mouse, like you have a key to select your vacuum to hoover seeds, you have a key to select a little chainsaw that you can use to trim plants back if you've gone over a space that you need, if you've overgrown a plant pot that you want to use, for example. And on the controller, it was very, very easy to select different tools and to back out of using a seed. If you have a seed in your hand, you could very easily go back and drop it. And so the controller was very nice in terms of selecting the different tools, but not so much in terms of using a cursor, because it's never great on a controller. So neither control scheme fit me entirely well, but both were perfectly usable. I do also think that it was very interesting to talk about this game in the same episode as Townscapers and Islanders, because Townscapers didn't quite bring enough gameplay or enough progression, and Islanders was very points focused, almost to a fault. And I think that Cloud Gardens, actually, in contrast to those two, does a perfect job, really, of combining creativity and creative mode. And there is an endless creative mode if you want it, but the different levels really bring a nice sense of progression to the game. So that's something it did a really good job of. And I would say that as a whole, this is a very thought-provoking game, a very arresting game. I'm definitely going to be playing it now and then and getting to the end and seeing just where this journey goes. It's a really fun game. It's a really good little indie game. That's Cloud Gardens. So that's our episode. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Cloud Gardens and all of the other games that I mentioned this episode. Thanks very much to everyone who suggested these games to me. Thanks to the people who suggested the relaxing Islanders and Townscaper, and to Louis for showing me Cloud Gardens. I'll be back next week with another episode. I'm not sure what it will be about yet. Perhaps Psychonauts 2 or Lake. I think I'm going to be playing a lot of those. I'm also looking forward to the release tomorrow of The Artful Escape. It's an Annapurna game that's a kind of a psychedelic rock opera platformer that looks really, really fun. I had my doubts about it, but I heard a review of it today on YouTube, and it was an absolutely glowing review, so my hopes are now high for that game. So maybe I'll dip into that one too. If you'd like to stay in touch in the meantime or follow the show and see what I'm playing, you can follow Gaming in the Wild on Twitter, on Instagram, Twitch and YouTube. I do stream sometimes. Every day on Twitter I'm talking about games and sharing screenshots and asking questions and getting into conversations about games. So you're very welcome to come and join me there. There is also the Patreon, of course. If you'd like to support the show, that's at patreon.com/gaminginthewild. Thanks very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye for now.